In this episode of our photography review show, we're gonna review photos from 19 photographers. Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of our photography review show. I hope you had a great week and I hope that you're ready for another huge portion of photography reviews. For those who never been here before, my name is Jakub and I'm a landscape photographer based in West Sussex, England. Now for the past 6 or 7 months I've been reviewing your photos here at Clever Photographer, and it's something that became very popular, and this is why we had to limit the entries to 1 or 2 photos per photographer per week, and that's why we also take the show and usually divide it between 2 or 3 different parts. In the first part we focus on the landscape photographers, and in the second part or third part for the rest of the photography styles. Now we have 19 photographers to look at, so let's jump straight into it. But before we're gonna do that, just a quick reminder that starting from this week, we changed the rules of the entries a little bit and we reserved the access to the photography review show to the members of our Clever Photographer Academy. Now this is our Facebook group where we have lots of amazing photographers and a great community of people who love to talk about photography, who also join our regular photography competitions and talk all things photography. So if you want to join us, make sure that you head to our website cleverphotographer.com/membership and you will find all the information there about how you can join us, how you can get all the bonuses of this membership, and one of them being this access to this photography review show. So that's out of the way, let's jump straight into it. And here we are with the first part of the show where we're going to be looking at landscape photographers. So we have 9 landscape photographers to look at, so let's jump to it. First of all, we have Árni here with 2 beautiful images, so let's look at them. Let's look at the details of the image, starting by looking at the camera. Sadly, there isn't any here or here, so no camera details, which is always a shame because when I get the camera details, it's just give me another tool to help you and give you a little bit of feedback about the camera settings and so on. However, that's fine, we'll focus on what we have and what we can see from the image. So starting from here, very nice light, very kind of dramatic sky, quite interesting foreground element, obviously lots happening, so it's kind of very dramatic picture right here. When we kind of zoom in a little bit, the sharpness seems to be fine, so that's all good there. There is a little bit of noise kind of visible in the sky and around the sky, so I'm assuming maybe the ISO was just a little bit higher. It's nothing crazy, but it's there. And also just kind of looking at it, there is maybe just a little bit of some kind of sensor dust visible here. But other than that, it's quite good. So from kind of looking at just the kind of texture and looking at light again, it seems to be fine. So looking at it from this, again, the exposure is good because there is lots of details in the sky. The light is nice and very interesting. The sharpness is good as well. Only thing I can see from here is a little bit of a noise in the sky and maybe the darker areas. That would be from the technical point of view. Looking at this one again, sadly no data here, but again from what I can see, kind of blue hour looking picture with lots of blue shades all the way through with some greens here. The white balance seems to be a little bit off by looking at it. The green seems to be a little bit not 100% sure there, but we'll look at it in the editing. So let's just kind of zoom in and look at the sharpness. Now this seems to be maybe even higher ISO with some noise reduction because there is a lots of details missing here. It's almost becoming like a watercolor painting, and that's quite often happen either with a really high f-stop, so something like f26 or so on, or with lots of noise and then some post-production and color or noise reduction there. So that's one thing I see. There's lots of details at the back as well, so the f-stop was probably quite high here. So that's quite nice. I enjoy that. The light is quite nice. I like the reflection as well. That when it comes to exposure, there is still details in the sky, so that's quite cool. So my first and only thing I would be really focusing here is the level of details, which I think comes together with probably the amount of noise, and that's about it. So, which brings us to the composition. Now, this being a foreground element, I wish a little bit that it was, you had the full piece there, like you had the full, like a little island, without cropping it. I think that would be a little bit nicer. However, when you kind of look at the traditional rules, obviously you have your foreground with a little bit of reflection, then you have your middle ground, background. That works quite nicely. I think the amount of sky there is just enough. There is a little bit of depth, obviously, with being the kind of different layers. I think that works nicely too. The subject is quite clear here as well. It's kind of quite simple situation, so I think that's nicely done too. It's just, I think it's, yeah, one thing I think it's missing and it would be helpful is something that would give us a little bit of sense of scale, because me looking at it like this and having no idea how big it is, this could be maybe a meter or two, or it could be also several meters big. And as there is no trees, no plants, no people, nothing to give us any sense of how big it is, maybe it's just something to kind of think of for a future shots. Nothing necessarily wrong from the composition point of view, other than the cropping here of this part. However, maybe just a few tips of what you could improve for the next time. Now, with this one, I quite like the subject. I think it's really nicely done. I like how you kept lots of the sky, because I think that's quite important here. However, when it goes to these kind of elements, when obviously this is a lot about playing with the reflection as well as the symmetry of the actual scene, I think that's why you really want to make sure that everything is straight and nicely centered. So let's just double check with your cropping. That's the first one, but maybe even before cropping, I would double check my geometry. And for this, we can either use the auto and see, didn't do a very good job at all. So then we use the guided. So first of all, we're gonna paint on the horizon. So that way we know that the horizon is nice and straight. Let's just make sure that we have it right. Something like this, I think. And then on this one, something like this. So we have the horizon straight, maybe even less. And then we work it out in a comparison with the actual statue or sculpture. Then we do something like this. And now we have those two very symmetrically together. Now we can add one more line and place it right here. So that way we make sure that even the statue is straight down here. And now we have it really nicely centered. Let's just make sure that we are really centered here. Let's have a look, maybe a little bit more here. And that's about it. So that's perfect. Once we have it, we can jump into cropping. And in cropping, we just make sure, when I'm watching up here, that we are in a center. So once we're there, I think something like this. I think I would rather have a more sky than the bottom here. So I will keep the sky in. Also, I'm keeping an eye on the sides here to make sure I have a similar side. And that's it. And now it really makes sense. So really you're playing with the reflection here. You're playing with the symmetry. And I think the composition is super strong and beautiful. So that's about it. This is what I would do with it. Few clicks, working with the geometry and cropping, and it can create incredible result. When it comes to post-processing, obviously this is more on a darker side, but then it's very dramatic. I think the fact that this is kind of bright and it has all these highlights on it works quite nicely, and it creates quite nice contrast towards the background. So I think that's quite nicely done as well. And to be honest, I quite like the overall feel of the image, and I wouldn't change much of it. The natural light actually creates quite nice vignette. I like how this is a little bit darker. Well done on this one. Now, looking at this one, I think one thing to start with is to make sure that our geometry is fine again. So we can bring the crop tool and just double check the horizon, but this time it looks quite fine. No, it may be a little bit, maybe just a little bit, just to make sure again that everything is nice and straight. So something like this. Second thing is definitely the white balance. Let's see, if we do auto, this is more like probably the colors it had initially, but we don't have to push the yellow that much. Also, when I zoom in, look how much more natural this look. This is before. Look how much blue is there. This is probably how it was supposed to be. So 35, 25 are the values. If we don't want to apply it to the entire image, Now also look at the these little islands, how green they become. And when I go auto, how much natural they look. So 35, 25, we can just bring our brush here. We can dial the same values. So 35 and 25. And then we just make sure that our brush is all set up right. Maybe the flow on 85. Feather fully, density, and now we can just brush these values to, for example, here. Let's see, it helps. And then similarly at the background. So we're not removing the blue from everywhere, we're just removing it from the parts which needs a little bit of recovery to make it just a little bit more natural. So something like this, I think. So we're not completely damaging it. Obviously, you can take as much as time you want. It's just to give you an idea of what can be done. This area again as well. So that's about it. I feel like this foreground here maybe need one more brush where we just push the pink. And let's see if we can help it a little bit more. Maybe even a little bit yellow. Anyway, something like this, like this. Now, if we want, we can add to it a little vignette still here. And then we can use, for example, the linear gradient, create one from the top here, just close the image a little bit. And then again, another one from the bottom and close the image a little bit more. Yep. And that's about it. That's, let's see, before, after, just a little bit more natural touch. And I think the result is quite nice. Anyway, I think the image is cool. I think the sharpness would need a little bit of help. I wouldn't have cropped this foreground element if it would be possible a little bit. Other than that, great view. Árni, thank you very much for sharing your photos with us. If you have more of them, make sure you send them next time. Looking at the next photographer, Bill. Bill, we have 2 images from you. And I'm trying to figure out if this has any connection together or if it's just 2 images separate. Let's see. I think it's 2 separate images. Okay, let's have a look at it. So first of all, looking at the camera settings here, we are looking at Nikon D7200. So that's great. This one is 18 to 55 millimeters. They probably all same, so that's fine. So let's start with this one. So ISO 100, 18 millimeters, f20, 1/10 of a second. Now, when I'm looking at it like this, it's really difficult to see, and maybe I'm too zoomed in, but the image is also really, really low quality. The 316 kilobytes is really small, so from the setting wise, ISO 100 is spot on. F20, I think, is way too big or way too large for what you're trying to capture. It's a one single tree. There isn't really any depth to it. By increasing the f-stop, you have to put the shutter stop down. So I'm not 100% sure why you went for this. If you have maybe, you want to leave me a comment under the video to let me know why you went for the f20. So I understand a little bit more. But I think the overall problem with this picture is that when I just view it on my screen and with this, it looks blurry, which I don't think it was originally. It's more to do with the size of the image. Let's have a look at the other one. The other one is almost 3 megabytes, where this one is 316. So I think that's the biggest problem. So just kind of quick feedback on this one. I love the sky. I think for the silhouette effect, you need to find a tree where there is not that many bushes at the bottom. Also in the bushes, you're getting this kind of purple and greens, which is really heavy chromatic aberration coming sometimes from the camera lacking of the dynamic range. So some of the cameras are not able really to work with that much darkness in contrast with that much brightness. So what I would do, I would probably just make it darker, but then I understand by making it darker, the tree would kind of disappear. And this is what I mean by sometimes it's easier to find a tree which is standing all alone and there is nothing behind it. and then you kind of photograph it as a lonely tree. There's just lots happening here. So for the composition, I think the sky is brilliant, the light is brilliant, the post-processing is quite good as well, but as the composition goes, this is a little bit of a shame because then it takes lots of attention away from the tree itself. So we move to this picture because that's much easier to judge with this quality. Again, looking at the settings, ISO 100, f20, 1.6 second shutter speed, so a kind of longer exposure a little bit, creating and keeping it really nice. I love the sky. Again, it's a kind of similar idea. I think it works much better here as there is kind of multiple trees. What I would probably do when it comes to composition, again, it's a little bit unbalanced. You know, when you're cropping away things, this one, there is like a very dominant tree here with lots of it left. Here, there is just a little bit of it. So what could we do? We could do something like this. If we would, now we're talking composition. So obviously you're looking just for the one lonely tree and you're keeping it in, and then it becomes much cleaner, much more balanced. So that could be one option. The second option, because you want this tree to be really in a center, I wonder how much we would have to crop it for it to be a bit more balanced. At least like this, and we still have much more of this tree here. And this is a little challenge with these kind of photos, is really the skill is to find order in something what naturally doesn't have an order. The trees grow however they want to be and so on. So it's just something to kind of think of for the future when you're looking for the subjects. Really the balance is what creates the order in it, and as this one is really dominant here and this one not so much, it just kind of lean on one side. That's about it. Other than that, I love the sharpness. I think it's there. That's clear. I love the sky, so the exposure is very well done here. There's no chromatic aberration here, so that's very well done too. And that's about it. For the composition, we talk about it. So it's quite nice. It's a lovely idea. However, if you have a sky like this, for future, you would really want one tree which is right against it, creating the lovely scene. It would be just so much more powerful. And when it comes to post-processing, it's quite nice and natural. I don't mind it. I like the level of shadows that you can see the details. I think that's really nice. The color and saturation is very natural too, so I think that works very well too. Highlights, shadows, very well done. So not much I would change here. Now you could of course push it. I could select the sky right here and then really push the temperature on it with the pink and purple, maybe even the saturation, bring down the highlights, bring down the exposure a little bit and make it so much stronger compared to what it was. But that is very, very artistic thing to do, and it's completely up to you what you've done with it. And I think what you've done with it looks very cool, so I wouldn't worry about it at all. This is just something what you could still do with the image if you would want to play around with it a little bit. So Bill, thank you very much for sharing your image. It was great to review it for you. If you have more of them, make sure you send them to us soon. Which brings us to David. David, we have some lovely long exposure captures here with this beautiful river and this red house. Very, very nice. So let's have a look at it. Let's see if we have any camera details. And we do. So starting with this image, Nikon Z5, the lens is 14 to 24. And from your camera setting, ISO 100, 14 millimeters, f11, 1/4 of a second. So as this camera setting goes, it's spot on. ISO 100 definitely keeping everything nice and in control. F11, quite rightly, I mean, there are some elements closer to you. Obviously, the scene is quite deep, so you want to keep everything nice and sharp. And 1/4 of the second to start with to see the longer exposure effect. It still works, it's nice and smooth, but you can see some texture on it. Quite like it. Now, let's just kind of look at the image, looking at it from this point of view. Again, maybe I'm a bit too zoomed. Let's see if I could just zoom to 100. Yep. Yep, the sharpness is there, the texture is there. There is even some texture in the sky, which is quite nice too. When it goes to long exposure, it's not super long, but on these it works a little bit more than on here, but it's still quite cool. The colors are nice. It's quite saturated, the overall image, but I really like it. The light is nice. It's diffused, which I think works very well for scene like this. You really don't want heavy shadows and heavy, like a strong sun. So all in all, very well done. Which brings us to this image. And again, we're talking about camera settings. So this time you use Nikon D810, 17 to 35 millimeters lens, and ISO 100, 17 millimeters f11 3 second. So when it comes to the setting, we pretty much on the same thing. ISO 100, perfect. f11, definitely, especially when you have the tree here. And 3 second. 3 second looks a little bit cooler, I have to say. Of course, that the key really, once you start to go to these 3, 5, 10 seconds, is to make sure that the other elements, which in this case is the grass and water and everything, is sharp. That's what really is important when it comes to long exposure photography in a river specifically, because you want to make sure that the contrast between the blur and the softness of water has to really stand up against the sharpness of the edges and the rocks and everything. And that works very well. So very well done here. There is some fog as well, which I think looks really cool. Again, the sharpness here is very, very nice. There is, I don't know what it's coming from, but I see a little bit of noise, which could be simply just from the exporting it into the JPEG or whatever. It's still very, very nice. A little bit less saturated as well, and in overall a little bit more natural, I think. This one is really, really pushed, especially the greens, where this one is, the colors are a little bit more natural, and I think it works all together with the fog and everything. That brings us to composition, and I think when it comes to composition, this one is a little bit better, but on both of them, I really wish you could have captured the house without the tree in front of it. Now, of course, this one is better because there is much less there, but I know it wasn't probably possible because looking at the river, you would probably have to be standing right here on it, but that would be the desired view, of course, if you could. I wonder from the other side what you could do. Then on the other side, I like this one because there is still this little like waterfalls here. I think that looks really cool. So damn this tree. I wish it wouldn't be there at all. However, still very, very nice. The reason why I like the house and I'm kind of focusing on it is obviously it has a different color, so it brings huge contrast. It kind of bring attention on itself, so that makes complete sense. And it would just make it cleaner. So picture like this with a really nice frame with the 2 trees, and if there would be no these branches, that would have been great. But other than that, the composition is great. This one is also really, really nice. What would I do? No, well, you could crop it to the kind of high definition 16:9. I think that would look also really cool. So something like this. Could you have crop it with just leaving a little bit of the tree? You could totally. And maybe same on the other side, something like this, and really kind of zoom in and punching and focusing on the water. Maybe you could go a little bit lower, something like this, and that's what I would do. I really like your geometry. Everything is nice and straight as well, and all in all, it's really, really lovely. So just something you could do there. And on this one, similarly, I would probably go a little bit, I would probably crop some of this bottom away. Doesn't really add too much to the image, and you want to really focus on the top of the image. It's nice that the house is on your kind of golden third and everything, but I think the 16:9 in this case, to do something like this, would just punch in a little bit further and work nicely as well. Also, by doing that and maybe zooming even further, so let's say we would do something like this, we would bring more attention to the actual water. Which brings us to the post-processing, and first of all, just double check again the white balance. What does O2 does to us? It pushes the pink, and I'm not surprised at all because, as I say, the greens looks well oversaturated, and this is completely normal for a camera when there is lots of dominant color, and usually this happens for green or blue. When there is lots of that, it actually takes the color and starts to tint the other shades into it as well. So let me show you before, and look at the trees. That's where it's really visible, on the stones as well. And then let me show you after. Suddenly they get very natural color. So that's really important. Also with the long exposure, you can also sometimes zoom in and use the picker and actually use the water as the guide onto the long exposure, but you kind of need to find the right spot. So these were green or maybe in a shadow, but this one works. And that's where it kind of brings you. So this looks a little bit more natural. I would probably bring the saturation down a little and push the vibrance. So what it does, saturation makes everything colorful, everything saturated. Where the vibrance just takes the parts which are naturally more saturated. And I think it just makes it a little bit more natural altogether. After that, what else could you do? Definitely vignette. And then probably what you could do, bring down a little bit the exposure, just a little bit, so that it kind of closes this foreground. And then add some local adjustment with radial gradient, pointing it towards the house, making sure the feather is on, and bring a little bit of exposure on it. So that way you're making it look like there is a sun hitting it, and you're bringing a little bit of attention to it. One more radial gradient, maybe on the water here. Again, just with a little bit of exposure. And one more, not this time, radial gradient again on this part, again with a little bit of exposure. This is something what you could do. If you would really want, you could close the image from the top to kind of bring more attention towards the center like this. And you could do the same from the bottom right here. Just something like this. So this is what I would do with this one. Let me show you before, after, just something a little bit different. And the edit would be pretty much similar here, but much less of it because I think this one looks much more natural. I'm pretty sure if I would go here into the white balance and go for auto, you see this one, because the colors are much more natural, the auto doesn't do much changes on it. It keeps it the way it is. It's brilliant. Both of the images are brilliant. I love your long exposure. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. It was a pleasure to review them. If you have more images, make sure you send them to us for the future episodes. Which brings us to Graham. Graham, 2 images from you. Stunning sunset. Oh my God, so beautiful. Beautiful reflection of the boats. Love it. Beautiful, beautiful. And this one, shame for the daylight, but still excellent composition. Beautiful sky. And I love the little castle at the back. So let's have a look at it. Starting here, what are we looking at? Canon 7D. The lens is 10-22. ISO 100, 10 millimeters, f22, 1/25th of a second. So ISO 100, spot on. 10 millimeter is quite wide, and that's the reason why all these stones look really big compared to the rest. And at the back, the tower and everything else looks really tiny compared to it. It's not a problem. I think it's certain look, but that's how it looks. That's what the lens will make it look like. f22, I understand why the f22 here, probably going for sharpness all the way through, because even with f22 you didn't really get much slower exposure. I mean, a little bit maybe, but it's none of the smooth things you would hope for. Just be careful for your f22. You need to know based on your camera, but quite lots of cameras by f22 start to introduce lots of not noise, they take away sharpness basically. Higher you go, there is a common myth that the higher you go with f-stop, the sharper the image gonna be, and truly f16 is usually maximum for most landscape photographers. Depending if they do special projects, yes, they go higher, but f16 is where they stick because that's a really good balance between the sharpness of the lens and then the performance of the lens. Just a suggestion. Of course, if you would have an ND filter, you could put it on and slow the exposure a little bit more, that you could go for the waves to be more smooth. But I think as the f-stop goes, it's still quite fine. Sharpness all the way through, which is really cool. Quite nice light. It's a little harsh, but nothing crazy. There's a little bit of glow at the back. Let's just zoom in. Yeah, there is, you see at the back, there is a little bit of it starts to look a little bit like color water painting. There are some people maybe, but you can't almost recognize what it is. So lots of details there are kind of lost anyway, even with f22. Still, that's about it for the technique. Looking at this one, now we talking about business. ISO 100, 18 millimeters, f4 1/8 of a second. So starting first of all by looking at the settings, I think it's all good. F4 probably to keep the shutter speed still manageable, so that's fine, and also to make sure that the boat stays nice and sharp, which you manage quite well. For 1/8 of a second, you did very good job on keeping them nice and sharp. The reflection is great of the sky as well as the boats. The light is beautiful. The level of details is very, very nice. This one is top on. This one is great. Love it, love it. Beautiful, beautiful. Excellent. So that brings us to composition. Composition wise, I think this one is brilliant as well. I love how you kept about 1/3 of the sky. I think that works very, very well when it comes to composition. Reflection, ultimate composition tool, which works really, really well here. The colors create a really nice scene. The foreground, middle ground of the boats, then into the water to the middle ground and the sky just works really, really well. The details in the sky, the colors, the saturation, everything, brilliant, brilliant. Composition wise, really, really well done. You could crop off a little bit of the bottom if you would like to, but I think it's perfectly fine. That's more like an artistic spot. On this one, when composition goes, I think it's actually really nicely done. I love the foreground, then it creates the flow and leading line towards the actually tower here. The sky is quite nice, again in 1/3. On this one, I really wish more it's a question of level of details and sharpness at the background. I think you can kind of see it from afar that something isn't 100% right there. But other than that, as a composition goes, it's well thought and it's well executed. When it comes to post-processing, let me just double check your white balance on this one. Right here, oh, it was even brighter. So it pushes it automatically towards the yellow, which is a little bit of shame. I wonder if you could push a little bit of the pink. Just a touch maybe. Little bit of saturation down for me and push the vibrance. So that way we're just coloring the parts which needs to be colored. Maybe in effects, I would push the texture a little bit more to let it all stand up. Close it with a little vignette, nothing crazy, just like this. And then I would do a little bit of local with a linear gradient. Let me see. Did I lost it? Here, linear gradient. And really kind of something like this. And one more from the top. That's about it. So then you can create one more in here and just do a little bit of exposure and bring some attention towards that. So that's about it. Graham, I hope this was helpful. We look at different things, both beautiful images. This one is a top on, loving the result. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Take care, stay safe. And if you have more images, make sure you send them next week. All right, moving to the next photographer, we have a John. John, thank you for sending us 2 great pictures. Let's have a look at them right away. One black and white, one forest-like. So let's have a look at this one. Nikon D 3300, 10 to 20 millimeters, and from your camera setting, ISO 100, 10 millimeters, f9, 1/400 second. So ISO 100, spot on there, 10 millimeters, so super wide. F9, good choice, usually more than enough for this scene to keep everything nice and sharp. 1/400 of a second, obviously keeping lovely details in the sky, works quite well here with even the trees being quite sharp. The sharpness is good, just gonna double check. Yeah, the texture is good as well. Obviously, the contrast between the sky works very well here. It's the geometry is something what I would look at, and we can look at it a little bit later. However, from a technical point of view, as a black and white goes, I think it's quite nice, heavy contrasty, with kind of lovely result. I really love the background sky in comparison with the cathedral. I think that works quite cool. So technically, nothing really that wrong. A little bit of a halo around the trees, so I don't know if you have pushed the details a lot or maybe you changed the sky. However, still cool. Moving on, this one, Nikon D700, 24 to 70, and from the setting ISO 200, 24mm f9, 1/125th of a second. So ISO 200 is quite cool for this scene. Obviously, when in forest, the 200 is quite good value to help a little bit with the longer exposure required. F9 still giving you quite nice sunburst here, which is quite cool. 1/125th of the second still good enough for creating lots of details, bringing everything out and keeping it nice and sharp. So when we kind of just zoom in to this point, the sharpness is there, so that's quite nice. The light obviously a little bit harsher from this side, but creating quite nice scene. I really like the sunburst, so that looks quite cool as well. You have a little bit of lens flare here, which is a quite nice effect. Depend if you artistically like it or not. It's completely up to you. And that's about it. Technically quite nicely done. Lots happening in the center here. I think this picture would also look quite cool in black and white, to be honest, because obviously with the light being a little bit harsher and the tones and everything tuned down, the colors are not super saturated, but it's completely up to you. Which brings us to the composition. I quite like how it's balanced with these two trees on the side. I'm not crazy about the sign. It's just up to you. I mean, you could easily remove it in a Photoshop, but again, that's more artistic decision than anything else. This tree, I think, works quite nicely as well. From the cropping, maybe just making sure that both of those are or similar size and distance. So if I just unlock it, maybe something like this to make it a little bit more balanced. You could also turn it a little bit just to kind of keeping it nice and straight. That's about it. The sun, the path, creating a nice view. It's clear what it's about. I think it's quite cool. Now, talking about this one, I think that's where the geometry needs a little bit of a help. I know you're shooting into the sky, but everything is kind of falling on a side a little bit. So maybe by trying something like this, just kind of pushing the geometry with this and with this, you would get something like this. I know it's still a little bit too, just with the architecture, I think you really need to be careful about how you're going to push it. The geometry in this case doesn't help greatly. I can see that, so we're gonna have to leave it. It's just lots of cropping. I wonder if you would have maybe just focused on the main tower or from the side, because it's kind of half flat but half off. So I'm just not super crazy about it. What would look probably really cool would be even something like this. If you would have captured something like this, I think that looks also really cool. And right away you're letting people know that what you're doing, it's kind of artistic view rather than this where just lots of time you see this when people don't know how to fill in the frame and everything. However, I really like what you're trying to do with the contrast with the sky. I think that works really cool. I think it's very well edited. It's quite nice, clean, contrasty black and white image with lots of lovely light and lots of details and texture on it. So that's quite nicely done. When it comes to this one, we can double check the white balance if we want to. However, you were in quite good numbers, so we're good there. Obviously, we could push the contrast a little bit. I think I would minus in effects the clarity just to make it a little bit more natural and just to bring the glow of the sun out a little bit more. So that's one thing you could do. And again, you could really turn it to black and white, revisit your whites and blacks, and then see if maybe something like a masking, radial gradient, in this case here with some extra exposure and bringing down the clarity to make it glow a lot, would maybe create something nice as well. It's just an idea, something a little bit different. I like both versions. It's quite kind of different. And what I really like on this photo is that even though it's quite chaotic and busy scene, you found order in it. And I think that's what really makes it different in forestry and in a wood photography. So well done, John. I'm sorry I can't help you much more today on these. However, this one is great. I love the sunburst. This one, not 100% my thing, but still great attempt and great edit. But I know that you're great with black and white photography anyway, so well done. And thank you for sending the pictures over. Which brings us to Ketan. Ketan, you send me lots of images, and sadly, we can only review 1 or 2 per week. So which one are we going to look at? Definitely the first one. Now, where did I lose you? Here. Definitely the first one. That's a lovely image, so we can look at that. And what other image we could look at? We could look at your portrait, for example, this one. So, okay, so let's bring it forward up here and let's look at the 2 images. So starting with this one, let's have a look if we have any camera details. And we don't. That's a shame. Anyway, let's have a look at it and let's see what we see just with our eyes. So by zooming in, the sharpness is quite good. The color is nice. The light is good. The exposure is good. Lots of details. In the sky, there is a little bit of glow here. So I don't know if you post-process it a lot or if you've done some sky replacement. Either way, I think it's quite impressive scene. The water is nice, so it looks a little bit like a longer exposure looking at it like this. So that's just something to kind of keep an eye on. But the sharpness is good. The light is nice. There's probably a bridge behind you, so there's kind of heavy shadow here. However, there's lots happening. It's nicely done. It's a nice landscape composition there. Now we have this portrait here with this gentleman with lots of nice details on him. Let's see if I just go to 100. Lots of nice details on him. Quite nice light at him as well, which looks good. The sharpness is great. I love the depth on it as well. So it's almost like a travel / documentary capture, which I think works very well. The sharpness, the light, the depth, all works super well on this one. When composition goes, actually, again, very well done. The fact that both of the ends are kind of disappearing makes it work quite well. You can clearly see he's on water. The reflection works quite well as well. The kind of way he's turning towards you, the light, and again, the depth really helps the composition. And I think it's super cool. Now, you could obviously center him a little bit more in the center and crop it just a little bit further to really focus on him. But that's about it from my point of view. Now, on this one, I wouldn't really do much differently. I think the composition is great. There is lots of things happening. There's the foreground, middle ground, background. The sky has all the texture in it. I think it looks very, very cool. Now, when it comes to post-processing on this one, maybe a little bit of the exposure down. I would also keep an eye on my white balance, which not that warm, definitely, but maybe just a little bit. Definitely a little bit more pink. That was because there's lots of green hues. Let me show you before, after. I think this is much more natural, and that's about it on this one. And on this one, I think it looks really cool. If anything, I would add a vignette to it to bring even more attention towards the gentleman, but this one is superb. I love your portraits. I was looking at the other ones as well. I think they are really, really cool. Very well done. This one is maybe too bright. When I look at him like this, there's almost glow around him, but similarly on this one, but the rest of it is really cool. So, Ketan, thank you so much for sharing the pictures with us. It was great to review them for you. If you have some of the other ones you want me to review next week, just send them again and I will be happy to do that for you. Which brings us to Mohammad. Mohammad, we have 2 images from you. This one is beautiful. Beautiful capture of the camels with the different layers of the desert. That is gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. And then this one with the reflection in the water. The sky, I'm not sure about the white balance on the sky because it's almost green. So we'll revisit that in the post-processing. However, this one, that's a masterpiece. Brilliant, love it. So let's have a look at the camera details. There is no camera details. What about this one? Neither. Okay, so from what we can see, first of all, details on the actual people with the camel, really well done. Details all the way through up to here, and then it starts to kind of fade away, which I think is great as well. Brilliant light for this type of photography. You want this contrast, and also creating this shadow here, I think that works really, really well. Depth of field, very well done. All in all, excellent. Talking about this one, I love the reflection. I love what you're trying to do here. The light isn't great. There is lots of shadows, lots of kind of bright areas. I think that's a little bit of a shame, but still put together. I think technically the sharpness is here, the depth is here as well. I'm not sure about the sky. Something is just off with the sky. It doesn't look natural. It doesn't really match there. And the white balance neither, but the rest of it quite good. When it comes to composition, quite nicely done. I wouldn't do anything differently. The reflection is great. The amount of the sky is great. The crop is good. It's all good here when it comes to composition. This one, nothing to touch on the composition. Brilliant. The movement, the sharpness, the details, the light, the shadows, excellent. When it comes to post-processing, also nothing to add. Only thing maybe I would do, I would even darken the background a little bit further, just to bring even more attention towards the foreground, something like this. And maybe make it a little yellow because there are some blue hues on it. That's it. On this one, this is where we really want to jump into the white balance and see what's happening there. And you see right away when I jump in, it looks a little bit more natural on the top, but it's still not great. So what we can do, we can go into the masking, click on select sky, and now we can work with just the sky. And the sky looks green to me. So if we push the pink up, this is where it starts to be a little bit more natural. Let me show you before, after. Then we can add a little bit of yellow. And that's really how it should look. We can bring down the exposure a little bit to make it a little bit more natural, or the other way. Let's see. And clarity down to make it a little bit softer. Maybe not as bright, maybe something like this, but still cool. So I think this is what I would do with it. Let me show you before. After. Much better results like this. So Mohammed, great 2 pictures. Loving this one, my favorite picture of the week. This one is great as well. However, the sky definitely needed a little bit of help. So all in all, thank you so much for sending the pictures over. I hope this was helpful. Take care and send us more if you can. Which brings us to Nico. Nico, 1 picture from you this week. Very simple image, but actually very cool. Really like it. Something a little bit different. Let's have a look if we have any camera details here, and we don't, which is a little bit of a shame. However, looking at it from this, the sharpness is there, obviously, all the way through. Nice clouds, soft and natural, creating a really nice background for the tree. Very simple composition put together. Very well done. Let's just zoom in. No noise, so that's quite cool. The sharpness on the actual green plants works very well too. So all in all, very, very well done. The composition really nice as well, simple and powerful with a clear message. If anything, I would wish that there is a little bit more space at the bottom here to just push it all up, but still very, very well done. When it comes to post-processing, if you could, in Photoshop, I would try to remove the sign, but that would be just me. That's more artistic decision than anything. I think you have lots of green here, so that's where I would double check my white balance. You can also try the auto. And I can see that it kind of take away a little bit of the color of the sky. So what we can do, 25, we can go into the masking, then select sky, and then we can actually invert the selection. So that way we're selecting everything other than a sky. And now we can really push the yellow and pink. And that way it becomes much more natural, the colors on it. However, it doesn't affect the sky. So I think that's really cool. Let me show you before. After, much more natural. Specifically when you have this blue cloudy sky at the back, I think you want it a little bit warmer than this heavy green, oversaturated green. And it's completely normal. Most of the cameras, when they capture pictures where there is lots of blue or green, they try to push it too much and they try to push it in the other aspects of the image. Other than that, you know, a little bit of vignette goes always a long way. So I would say that would be same in this case. So something like this. You could push up some of the highlights by using another brush, bringing up a little bit of exposure and then painting into these areas or these areas as well. Just like that with maybe a little bit more yellow. You could help also to the garden here and a little bit to the tree. And then if you would want to play even further, you could bring another brush, bring down the exposure and actually add a little bit of drama to the sky. You know, just to have it a little bit more interesting. And that way you get before and after, just something a little bit different. So Nico, I hope this was helpful. I hope you have had a fun with it. It gives you a few ideas of what you could do. Take care, stay safe, and send us more pictures if you can. Which brings us to Tony and his 2 pictures here. Tony, this one, very cool. Although I'm wondering why you get this artifacts in your sky. That's a really shame because it's a beautiful, beautiful sky. But you have this kind of like a layers. I wonder if it's maybe how it was exported. Let's have a look. No, it's a TIFF. Interesting. And on this one, it's also a TIFF. It's a lovely little scene. So let's look about it. Let's look at it. Nikon D7000, ISO 160, so perfect there. F20, a little bit higher than I would go for this scene, especially when you have a blue sky. Stick between 7.1 and 16. I always say 11, but 16 is still good. I think once you go F20 and further, you start to really take away some of the sharpness, and I think it's a little bit of a shame. Unless you do special projects, I think F7.1 between F11 is more than enough. Everything will be sharp anyway, and you will not introduce any... you see, with F20, you would think all of this will be sharp, but really it's kind of soft and pixelated. And this background also isn't the greatest, so just a suggestion for a future. 1/80th of a second is perfect for making sure that the exposure is good, and also you can still handheld the camera. Looking at it from this point of view, the sharpness on the foreground is good. I'm not too worried about this. It's not that this is wrong, because that is just natural depth of field. It's just that with F20, you would think that everything's going to be super sharp, but even with that, it's not the case. Moving on this one, really one thing which strikes me is what it does to the sky. Look at the layers. Something really didn't go there right. Also, you have a little sensor dust here, which can be really easily removed by the healing brush. Nice and easy. And other than that, it's actually quite a lovely scene. I love the foreground. I think that works really well here with the sharpness in it. Kind of sharpness all the way through. Let's have a look if we have the details here. Yeah, ISO 160, perfect. I wonder why 160 on this one and this one. Is there any specific reason why you go for 160? If you can, just leave me a comment under the video and let me know why, so I understand more. Obviously, you like higher f-stops because f22 again being a little bit high, and again bringing this, you know, kind of softer end, which I think is shame. So you kind of sharp but soft on the other side. And 1/40th of a second is just about on the edge of what can be handheld. Nothing really wrong with that image. I'm more kind of interested why you have these artifacts here. And as a composition go, this is brilliant. Love the foreground, love the path and the flow, the middle ground with the rocks, the beautiful dramatic sky. I think that all works. I will repeat the same. So composition, great. Composition on this one, actually really nice. I like these little scenes. I think that works very, very well. You know, little house, little story. It's a clear subject. I think the sky kind of point towards the subject as well. That works really nice. The light is pretty. It's kind of a romantic scene, romantic view, and I think it works very well. So well done on this one. Post-processing, I don't know if I would do much. I always like to add little vignette just to close the scene. Double checking the white balance. You don't want it as yellow, so I think you were quite good there. Also, I would keep the pink up. So I think your white balance was good. The brightness is good. The shadows, the highlights works very well here. What about your whites? Are good. Blacks are good as well. So in overall, the post-processing is very good on this one. And on this one as well, I really like how it's kind of natural, very kind of Scottish, Celtic look and effect and colors. This is where you need to double check on it. So just something to kind of keep an eye on for the future to see where you at. So what was it? That was the last photographer. So Tony, thank you so much for sending us your photos. Double check what was happening there. Other than that, thank you. The pictures were really cool. Make sure you join us in the future. And the same goes for all of you folks. If you want to join us for the future episode of our photography review show, you should definitely check out our membership. It's called Clever Photographer Plus. You can find out more about it on cleverphotographer/membership. And also at the moment, we're running it for a special offer. So check it out today. Join us. There's a lot happening there. There's lots of reason why you should become our new members. For today, thank you very much for joining us. Stay safe, take care, and keep shooting.